The scent of orange blossoms hung heavy in the air, mixing with the salt breeze from the Mediterranean. I stood before the gilt-edged mirror in my grandmother's bedroom, watching my reflection transform into something I barely recognized. The wedding dress was exquisite, cream silk that whispered against my skin, hand-embroidered lace that had taken 6 months to complete. A masterpiece worthy of a Lucchese bride, worthy of a sacrifice. Bellissima, my Aunt Carlotta murmured, adjusting the cathedral-length veil with practiced hands. Her fingers trembled slightly, the only sign of the anxiety we all felt, but could never voice. Sei perfetta, Mona Lisa. Perfect. The word tasted like ash on my tongue, but I smiled serenely, keeping my gaze lowered as I'd been taught since childhood. A Sicilian bride should be modest, demure, grateful for the honor bestowed upon her. I had played this role so long it had become second nature. The quiet daughter, the obedient niece, the invisible woman who existed only to serve the family's interests. They had no idea what lived beneath the surface. The Montanari family is very powerful, Carlotta continued, her voice dropping to a whisper though we were alone. Ettore will be capo one day. You understand what this means, Cara. What is expected of you? I understood perfectly. I was a chess piece, moved into position to secure an alliance between 2 of Sicily's oldest families. The Luccheses had wealth and political connections. The Montanaris had muscle and territorial control. Together we would be unstoppable. Or so they believed. "Si, zia," I replied softly, my hands folded demurely in my lap. "I will honor our family." Carlotta's relief was palpable. She kissed both my cheeks, leaving the faint scent of her rose perfume. "Your mother would be proud. Che Dio ti benedica." May God bless me. I would need more than blessings for what I was about to do. The chapel of Santa Maria delle Grazie was packed with uomini d'onore, men of honor, though the term was laughable. I recognized faces from across Sicily, representatives from every casca that mattered. They filled the ancient pews in their expensive suits, whispering among themselves, conducting business even here, in God's house. My father waited at the chapel entrance, his face an impassive mask. Salvatore Lucchese had taught me everything I knew about survival in this world, though not in the way he intended. He'd shown me that women were currency, that daughters existed to be traded, that silence was the only armor we were permitted to wear. He'd also shown me exactly what needed to burn. "Pronta?" he asked, offering his arm. "Ready." I took his arm, feeling the stiffness in his posture. He was nervous, I realized with some satisfaction. This alliance mattered more than he'd admitted. The Luccheses were bleeding territory to the Corleonesi. We needed the Montanari strength. Without it, we were vulnerable. Without this marriage, we were nothing. The organ swelled with the opening notes of the processional. I fixed my gaze straight ahead as we began the slow walk down the aisle. Faces turned to watch, assessing, judging, calculating my worth. I kept my expression serene, my steps measured, my breathing controlled, and there, at the altar, stood Ettore Montanari. I'd seen photographs, of course. Grainy surveillance images, formal portraits from society pages, but nothing had prepared me for the reality of him. He stood nearly 6.5 feet tall, his broad shoulders filling out a custom-tailored charcoal suit that probably cost more than most men earned in a year. Dark hair swept back from a face that could have been carved from marble, strong jaw, prominent nose, full lips set in a hard line. His skin held the warm olive tone of true Sicilian heritage. But it was his eyes that arrested me. Dark brown, almost black, they tracked my approach with an intensity that would have terrified a different woman. There was intelligence there, ruthlessness, and something else I hadn't expected. A flicker of genuine curiosity. Good. Let him be curious. Curiosity would serve my purposes well. I reached the altar and my father placed my hand in Ettore's, His grip was firm, possessive, his palm warm against my cold fingers. He looked down at me, and I forced myself to meet his gaze for just a moment before lowering my eyes demurely. In that brief connection, I saw him catalog me. The dark hair gathered in an intricate updo, the green eyes I'd inherited from my Irish grandmother, the delicate features that made me look younger than my 26 years. I was small next to him, barely reaching his chest even in heels. Fragile-looking. Perfect camouflage. Father Benedetto began the ceremony in Latin, his weathered voice filling the chapel. I responded automatically to the familiar liturgy, my mind elsewhere. Around us, the congregation shifted, coughed, whispered. I caught fragments of conversation, business deals being negotiated, territorial disputes being settled. Even here, even now, the wheels of La Cosa Nostra never stopped turning. Ettore Domenico Montanari, accetti Mona Lisa Caterina Lucchesi come tua legittima sposa? Sì. His voice was deep, resonant, holding absolute certainty. No hesitation, no doubt. He'd been bred for this, to take what he wanted, to command without question, to rule with an iron fist wrapped in expensive leather. Mona Lisa Caterina Lucchesi, accetti Ettore Domenico Montanari come tuo legittimo sposo. I let the silence stretch for just a heartbeat too long enough for Ettore's grip on my hand to tighten fractionally, long enough for my father to shift his weight beside me, long enough for doubt to ripple through the congregation. Then I smiled, soft, sweet, the picture of bridal joy. "Si," I breathed. The relief was palpable. Father Benedetto continued, blessing the rings, heavy gold bands that would mark us as bound. Ettore slid mine onto my finger with deliberate care, his dark eyes never leaving my face. When I placed his ring, my fingers barely trembled. Another small victory. Io vi dichiaro marito e moglie. Ciò che Dio ha congiunto, l'uomo non separi. What God has joined together, let no man put asunder. The irony wasn't lost on me. God had nothing to do with this union. This was about power, territory, blood. This was about everything I was going to destroy. Puoi baciare la sposa? Ettore's hands framed my face with surprising gentleness. For a moment, I saw something flicker in his eyes, not just possession, but genuine interest. Then his mouth was on mine, the kiss carefully calibrated for our audience. Not too passionate, not too cold. Perfect. When he pulled back, his thumb brushed my cheekbone in a gesture that would seem affectionate to anyone watching. But I felt the assessment in it, the claiming. Mia moglie, he murmured. My wife. Mio marito, I replied softly. My husband. The congregation erupted in applause. We turned to face them, the families, the soldiers, the capodicina who controlled the territories. All of them smiling, celebrating this union that would reshape the power structure of Sicily. None of them seeing the truth. We processed back down the aisle together, Ettore's hand firm at the small of my back. I could feel the heat of his palm through the silk of my dress, could sense the controlled power in his movements. This was a man accustomed to dominance, to obedience. He would learn. The reception was held at Via Montanari, the family's ancestral estate overlooking the sea. The property sprawled across several acres of manicured gardens, ancient olive groves, and terraced vineyards. The main house was a testament to old money, 15th century architecture seamlessly blended with modern luxury. Frescoed ceilings, marble floors, priceless artwork that had been in the family for generations. This was my prison now, but also my battlefield. Hundreds of guests filled the gardens, the champagne flowing freely, the tables laden with enough food to feed a small village. Roasted lamb, fresh pasta, local cheeses, seafood pulled from the Mediterranean that morning. A zampognaro played traditional music, while older couples danced, their movements echoing centuries of Sicilian tradition. I sat at the head table beside Ettore, smiling, nodding, accepting congratulations with appropriate modesty. His hand rested on my knee beneath the tablecloth, a possessive gesture disguised as affection. I didn't pull away. "Sei molto tranquilla," he observed quietly, his lips barely moving. "You're very quiet." I turned to him with wide eyes, letting vulnerability show for just a moment. "It's overwhelming. So many people." "You'll get used to it." Not a comfort, but a statement of fact. "As my wife, you'll be expected at many gatherings. Family business requires social presence." "Of course." I lowered my gaze. "Farò il mio dovere." I will do my duty. Something shifted in his expression. Approval, perhaps. Or satisfaction at my compliance. His father, Don Vittorio Montanari, approached our table with a crystal glass of limoncello. The old man was in his 70s, but still commanded respect through sheer force of will. His once dark hair had gone silver, his face lined with decades of hard decisions, but his eyes remained sharp. "Benvenuta nella famiglia," he said, his gravelly voice carrying across the table. "Welcome to the family. Sei una bella ragazza. Darai a mio figlio molti nipoti, sì? You're a beautiful girl. You'll give my son many grandchildren, yes?" The assumption that my only value lay in my womb made my jaw tighten, but I kept my smile in place. "Se Dio vuole," I replied. "If God wills it." Don Vittorio laughed, a harsh sound that held no real warmth. "Dio ha poco a che fare con questo." God has little to do with this. He clapped Ettore on the shoulder. "Portala a casa presto. È tempo di consumare questo matrimonio." Take her home soon. It's time to consummate this marriage. Heat flooded my cheeks, not from embarrassment, but from rage at being discussed like breeding stock. Ettore's hand tightened on my knee, a silent message. Comportati. Behave. I would. For now. As the sun set over the Mediterranean, painting the sky in shades of blood orange and deep purple, the guests began to depart. Air kisses, firm handshakes, whispered promises, and veiled threats exchanged in equal measure. The intricate dance of La Cosa Nostra. Finally, blessedly, we were alone. Ettore led me through the villa to the east wing, up a grand staircase to the third floor. Our rooms, or rather, his rooms that I would now share. The master suite was massive, dominated by a four-poster bed that looked like it had witnessed generations of Montanari unions. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the sea, the moonlight casting silver paths across the dark water. "Your things have been moved here," Ettore said, shrugging out of his jacket and loosening his tie. "The closet on the left is yours. The bathroom as well, though we'll share the main space." I nodded, moving to the window. My reflection stared back at me, still in the wedding dress, the veil now removed, my carefully styled hair beginning to come loose. I looked like a ghost, pale and insubstantial against the darkness beyond. Mona Lisa. I turned. Ettore stood in the center of the room, his shirt partially unbuttoned, his tie discarded. Even in this state of casual undress, he radiated power. "Vieni qui." "Come here." It wasn't a request. I crossed to him slowly, keeping my expression neutral. When I stood before him, he reached out, his fingers finding the first button at the back of my dress. "I know this wasn't your choice," he said quietly, his breath warm against my neck as he worked the buttons. "Neither of us chose this, but we're bound now. What we make of it is up to us." The dress loosened, silk sliding against my skin. "What do you want to make of it?" His hands stilled. "An alliance, a partnership." The dress fell away, pooling at my feet, leaving me in nothing but my undergarments. Ettere's gaze traveled over me with frank appreciation, but also something else. Consideration. I don't expect love, Kara. But I do expect loyalty. Absolute loyalty. Can you give me that? I met his eyes steadily. Can you give me the same? A slow smile curved his lips. You're not what I expected. What did you expect? Someone more. Afraid. He traced a finger along my collarbone, the touch deliberate, possessive. Someone who would simply accept whatever I chose to give her. I let him see a flash of steel, just a glimpse. I am a Lucchese. We don't frighten easily. No, he agreed. I'm beginning to see that. His kiss was different this time. Less calculated, more searching. I responded carefully, walking the line between submission and challenge. He needed to believe I could be molded to his will. He needed to underestimate me. Just a little longer. When he finally released me, his breathing had quickened. Bellissima, he murmured. E tutta mia. Beautiful, and all mine. Tuo, I agreed softly. Yours. But as Ettore led me to the bed, as the moon cast its silver light across our joined bodies, as he claimed me with the confidence of a man who'd never been denied anything he wanted, I held one truth close to my heart. I was no one's. Not anymore. And soon, the whole world would know it. The first week of marriage passed in a carefully choreographed dance. I woke each morning in Ettore's bed, his arm heavy across my waist, his breathing deep and even against my neck. I would lie still, counting his heartbeats, memorizing the rhythm of his sleep. Knowledge was power, and I was collecting every scrap I could find. By day, I played the perfect Mowgli. I dressed in the clothes his mother had selected, elegant but modest dresses in muted colors, pearls at my throat, my hair styled in a sleek chignon. I took my meals when summoned, smiled when appropriate, spoke only when addressed. I attended the women's gatherings where the signoras gossiped over espresso and cannoli, their conversations a delicate balance of social niceties and veiled threats. They watched me constantly, those women, assessing whether I would uphold the old ways, whether I understood the unspoken rules that governed our world. The Codice del Silencio wasn't just for the men. It bound us all. We knew things, saw things, but we never spoke. Not to outsiders, not to authorities, not even to each other when it truly mattered. Come ti trovi? Ettore's mother, Donna Caterina, asked one afternoon as we sat in the villa's sunroom. How are you settling in? I kept my eyes on my embroidery, a handkerchief I'd been working on all week. Busy hands, quiet mind, invisible presence. Bene, grazie, I replied softly. Everyone has been very kind. Ettore è soddisfatto? Is Ettore satisfied? The question made my stomach clench, but I maintained my serene expression. I believe so, signora. She studied me for a long moment, her sharp eyes missing nothing. Caterina Montanari had been born into this life, married into it, raised sons for it. She knew every trick, every manipulation, every survival strategy a woman in our world could employ. Bene, she said finally. A satisfied husband is a manageable husband. Remember that. It was the closest thing to advice she would ever give me, a small crack in the armor of propriety that bound us all. I filed it away with everything else I was learning. But at night, alone with Ettore, the performance became more complex. He was an attentive lover, surprisingly so. I'd expected brutality, the casual violence that seemed to permeate everything else in his world. Instead, I found careful attention, genuine interest in my pleasure. It was almost worse, this tenderness that complicated the clean lines of my hatred. Dimmi cosa ti piace, he murmured one night, his lips against my throat. Tell me what you like. I could have lied. could have remained passive. But I was building something here, a foundation that required authenticity in unexpected places. So I told him, guided his hands, let him discover that beneath my demure exterior lived a woman with desires of her own. His response was gratifying. A sharp intake of breath, a tightening of his grip on my hips, a low sound of approval that vibrated through his chest. Così, he breathed. Mi piace quando parli. Like this. I like when you speak. You want me to speak? I challenged softly, my nails raking down his back. See. His hands tangled in my hair, ruining the careful style. In here, with me, you don't have to be silent. In here, you can be Vera. Real. The irony was devastating. He thought this was real. These nights where I let pieces of myself show, where I met his passion with my own. He had no idea it was all part of the performance, that every moan, every whispered word, every moment of apparent vulnerability was calculated. Or was it? That question haunted me in the quiet hours before dawn. How much was strategy, and how much was something else? Something dangerous that had no place in my plans. I pushed the thought away and focused on what mattered. Information. Ettore's study became my hunting ground. While he conducted business in the city, I would slip inside, careful to leave everything exactly as I'd found it. The desk held nothing of interest. Just legitimate business documents, contracts for the family's olive oil exports, real estate holdings. But I knew there had to be more. It took me 3 days to find the hidden safe behind the portrait of Don Vittorio's father. Another 2 to discover that Ettore used his mother's birthday as the combination, a small sentimentality I filed away for future use. Inside, I found what I was looking for. Ledgers detailing the family's true business. Protection rackets, smuggling operations, political bribes, territorial boundaries negotiated in blood, names, dates, amounts, a roadmap of La Cosa Nostra's infrastructure. I photographed every page with the small camera I'd hidden in my lipstick case, a gift from my grandmother, who'd learned long ago that women needed their own insurance policies. The irony that I was using her tool to destroy the very system she'd navigated wasn't lost on me. But it was the final document that made my hands tremble. A contract, signed 6 months before our wedding, detailing the terms of my marriage. The territories my father would cede to the Montanaris, the business partnerships that would be dissolved or absorbed, the percentages of profits from various enterprises. And there, in cold legal language, my worth. 1 breeding-age female, proven lineage, estimated 5 to 7 offspring. I stared at those words until they burned into my retinas. Not a daughter, not a woman, not even a name. Just livestock, valued by reproductive capacity. Something cold and hard crystallized in my chest. Whatever doubt I'd harbored, whatever softness Ettore's unexpected tenderness had created, it shattered in that moment. They had all agreed to this. My father, my uncles, the entire Lucchese clan. They'd reduced me to a commodity and sold me to the highest bidder. I would make them pay, all of them. That night, Ettore returned late from a meeting, which I'd learned was code for any business involving violence or illegality. He smelled of cigarette smoke and expensive grappa, his jaw tight with tension. "Problemi?" I asked, pouring him a drink from the sideboard in our room. He accepted the glass, downing half in one swallow. "Nothing you need to concern yourself with." I approached him slowly, my hands finding the knots of tension in his shoulders. "Posso aiutare?" Can I help? No. But he didn't pull away from my touch. There are aspects of the business that are not for women. Of course. I kept my voice soft, accepting. I only meant to ease your burden, not add to it. He turned, catching my wrists, his dark eyes searching my face. "What do you want, Mona Lisa? Veramente?" Really? The question caught me off guard. In the 2 weeks since our marriage, no one had asked what I wanted. Not once. Peace, I said, and it wasn't entirely a lie. Safety. A home. Is that all? I met his gaze steadily. What else is there for a woman like me? Something flickered across his face. Disappointment, perhaps, or recognition of a cage he'd helped build. More than you think, he said quietly. If you wanted it. Come. How? But he just shook his head, releasing my wrists. Domani, he said. Tomorrow. We'll talk tomorrow. Except tomorrow never came. I woke to shouting, the sharp crack of gunfire in the distance. Ettore was already out of bed, pulling on clothes with military efficiency. Resta qui, he ordered. Stay here. Lock the door. Don't open it for anyone except me. Cosa sta succedendo? What's happening? Adesso, Mona Lisa. Now. He was gone before I could respond, his footsteps thundering down the hallway. I rushed to the window and saw chaos below, men running across the grounds, muzzle flashes in the pre-dawn darkness, the distinctive sound of automatic weapons fire. An attack. Someone was attacking the villa. I should have been terrified. Should have hidden in the bathroom, cowered under the bed, done any of the things a proper wife would do. Instead, I dressed quickly, pulled my hair back, and retrieved the small pistol I'd hidden in my lingerie drawer, another gift from my grandmother, who'd believed in being prepared. Then I did something reckless and entirely calculated. I left the room. The villa was in lockdown, security flooding the hallways, but everyone was focused on the external threat. No one noticed one small woman in a dark dress slipping through the shadows toward Don Vittorio's study. The old man's private office held secrets even Ettore didn't know about. I'd discovered this through careful observation of the household dynamics, the way certain men came and went through the garden entrance, the locked cabinets Vittorio alone accessed. I had perhaps 10 minutes before someone thought to check on me. I used them well. The files I found confirmed what I'd suspected. The Montanari family was hemorrhaging money. Bad investments, failed ventures, territories lost to rival families. They needed the Lucchese alliance not just for expansion, but for survival. My father had known this, had leveraged it to negotiate better terms than the Montanaris wanted to give. But there was something else, something that made my blood run cold. A list of names, women's names, daughters of mafiosi, married into the family over the last 50 years, and beside each name, a date of death. Some lasted years. Many didn't survive their first pregnancy. None lived to see 40. The Montanari men didn't just use their wives. They consumed them. I was still staring at the list when the door burst open. Ettore stood there, blood on his shirt, fury in his eyes. Che cazzo stai facendo? What the fuck are you doing? I could have lied, could have claimed I'd gotten lost, was frightened, didn't know where I was. But something in his expression, the raw emotion beneath the anger, made me choose truth. Learning what you won't tell me, I said calmly, gesturing to the open files. About what this family really is. He crossed the room in 3 strides, his hand closing on my upper arm, not painfully, but firmly. You shouldn't be here. These are not things for you to know. Why? I challenged, holding up the list. Because I might object to becoming another name on this list? Another dead wife sacrificed to the great Montanari legacy? His eyes widened fractionally as he recognized what I held. Mona Lisa. Don't. I pulled away from his grip. Don't tell me this is different, that times have changed, that I'm safe. I've seen the pattern. I know how this ends. You don't know anything, he said. But there was something in his voice. Uncertainty, perhaps. Or the first crack in his absolute conviction. Then tell me, I demanded. Tell me why your mother looks like she's 50 when she's barely 40. Tell me why your Aunt Francesca died in childbirth with no baby to show for it. Tell me why every woman in this family walks around like a ghost. The gunfire had stopped outside. In the sudden silence, I could hear both our breathing, harsh and rapid. Il codice, Ettore said finally. Everything we do, everything we are, is governed by the code. Women are protected, provided for, honored. Bugiardo. Liar. The word came out sharper than I'd intended. Women are used. We're ammunition in your wars, bargaining chips in your negotiations, vessels for your heirs. And when we're used up, we're discarded. Non tu. Not you. He stepped closer, his hand coming up to cup my face with unexpected gentleness. I won't let that happen to you. You can't stop it, I said. And for once, I let him see real emotion, the rage, the fear, the absolute determination that had been building since the day my father told me I would marry a man I'd never met. You're part of the machine, Ettore. You can't save me from something you help perpetuate. His thumb traced my cheekbone, his dark eyes searching mine. What do you want me to do? It was the second time he'd asked me what I wanted. This time, I told him the truth. Brucia tutto, I whispered. Burn it all down. For a long moment, we stood there, the air between us charged with something far more dangerous than desire. Then, from the hallway, voices, his father's men, looking for their capo's son. We'll continue this later, Ettore said, releasing me. But something had shifted in his expression. Not agreement, not yet. But the first hint of possibility. I'd planted a seed. Now I just had to wait for it to grow. The attack on Villa Montanari changed everything. 3 men dead, 2 wounded, and a message spray-painted across the garden wall. La vendetta è dolce. Revenge is sweet. The Corleonesi, asserting their claim to disputed territory. I sat through the emergency council meeting in Don Vittorio's study, the only woman present. A break with tradition that had raised eyebrows but couldn't be challenged. As Ettore's wife, I had the right to hear matters that affected our immediate household. The fact that I'd been found in Vittorio's office during the attack had, paradoxically, legitimized my presence. If I'd already seen the files, there was no point in keeping secrets. Besides, the old men reasoned, what could one small woman do with such information? Everything, as it turned out. I Corleonesi si stanno facendo sempre più audaci, Don Vittorio growled, his fist striking the mahogany desk. The Corleonesi are growing bolder. Dobbiamo rispondere con forza. We must respond with force. Forza, echoed his consigliere, Luca Benedetti, a man whose entire personality could be summed up in violence and loyalty. We hit their holdings, burn their crops, make examples, and start a war we can't afford, Ettore interrupted, his voice cutting through the rising fervor. Look at the numbers. He spread financial documents across the table. We're overextended. Every retaliatory strike costs money we don't have. The Corleonesi know this. They're baiting us into bleeding ourselves dry. Silence fell. No one wanted to acknowledge the family's financial precariousness, but the evidence was undeniable. Then what do you suggest? Vittorio demanded, his eyes cold. Ci arrendiamo? That we surrender? No. Ettore's gaze found mine across the room, held it for a fraction of a second. I suggest we change the game. Over the next 3 hours, I watched my husband reveal a strategic mind I'd underestimated. He proposed consolidation rather than expansion, legitimate business ventures to replace failing illegal enterprises, alliances with families the Montanaris had previously disdained. It was radical, pragmatic, and absolutely contrary to every tradition the old guard held sacred. They fought him on every point. I waited until the arguments had reached a fever pitch, until voices were raised and old grudges resurfaced, until the meeting threatened to dissolve into chaos. Then I spoke. "Scusate," I said quietly. "Excuse me." Every head turned toward me. Ettere's eyes widened fractionally. Warning or encouragement, I couldn't tell. "Con rispetto," I continued, keeping my tone deferential even as I wielded the knife. "With respect. I am new to these discussions, so perhaps I misunderstand, but it seems the question is not whether to respond to the Corleonesi provocation, but how to do so without destroying ourselves in the process. See?" Grudging nods from several of the Capodecina. "Then perhaps," I said, "we should consider what the Corleonesi actually want. They attack us, yes, but they don't press their advantage. They make noise, but don't follow through. Why?" "Perché sono codardi," Luca spat. "Because they're cowards." "Or because they want us to overreact," I suggested. "They want us to spend resources we don't have, to create chaos that benefits them. What if we simply didn't? Didn't?" Vittorio's voice was dangerously soft. "You suggest we show weakness? I suggest we show strength through restraint." I moved to the table, my finger tracing a map of Sicily. "The Corleonesi control the western territories. We control the east. There's a buffer zone here, land that's in dispute. What if we offered to settle it? Not through violence, but through negotiation. Give them what they want, but in exchange for something we need more. Peace. Stability. Time to reorganize our finances without the constant drain of conflict." The room erupted. "Impossibile! Vergognoso! Shameful! Non possiamo mostrare debolezza. We cannot show weakness." Only Ettore remained silent, his expression unreadable. Don Vittorio stood, his chair scraping back. "Basta! Enough!" He turned to me, and I saw something I hadn't expected in his hard eyes. Consideration. "You would have us negotiate with our enemies? Give them what they want without a fight?" "I would have us survive," I said simply. "Survival requires pragmatism, not pride." "Parli come una Lucchesi," he observed. "You speak like a Lucchesi." "Sono una Montanari ora," I corrected gently. "I am a Montanari now. And I want to see my family thrive, not bleed to death maintaining traditions that no longer serve us." The words hung in the air. I'd crossed a line, questioned the sacred traditions, suggested the old ways might be obsolete. I should have been dismissed, removed, reminded of my place. Instead, Don Vittorio laughed. It was a harsh sound, devoid of humor, but it wasn't anger. "She has coglioni," he said, addressing Ettore. "Balls. Your wife has more courage than half the men in this room." "Si," Ettore agreed, his eyes never leaving mine. "She does." "Va bene." Vittorio waved his hand dismissively. "Explore this negotiation, but carefully. I want deniability if it fails." The meeting adjourned, the men filing out with muttered comments, some approving, most skeptical. Luca Benedetti gave me a look of pure venom as he passed. When we were alone, Ettore approached me slowly. "Pericoloso," he said quietly. "Dangerous. What you did in there. But effective. Forcey. Maybe." He studied my face as though seeing me for the first time. "Where did you learn to think like that? To manipulate a room full of hardened criminals?" "From watching," I said honestly. "Women aren't permitted to speak in your world, so we learn to observe. We see everything. Ettore. Every power play, every strategic move, every weakness hidden behind bravado. We just aren't allowed to acknowledge it. Until now. Until now," I agreed. He circled me slowly, like a predator assessing prey, or perhaps like a man reassessing everything he thought he knew. You've been playing a role, he said. The quiet wife, the obedient daughter. But that's not who you really are, is it? Does it matter? I challenged. You got what you wanted, a wife who won't embarrass you, who understands her place, who produces heirs. Whether she's genuinely submissive or simply strategic about her survival, what difference does it make? Ogni differenza, he said, stopping directly in front of me. Every difference. His hand came up, fingers threading through my hair with unexpected tenderness. A submissive wife is a possession, but a strategic partner. He trailed off, his eyes searching mine. That's something I didn't know I needed. And if I want to be neither? I asked. If I want to burn your entire world down? I don't know what possessed me to say it, to reveal so much so soon. Perhaps it was the adrenaline from the meeting, or the intoxication of being truly heard for the first time in my life. Perhaps I was simply tired of lying. Ettore's eyes darkened. Then I suppose, he said slowly, the question is whether you want to burn it with me inside or beside you. My breath caught. You're not afraid of what I just admitted? Terrified, he said frankly, but also, his thumb traced my lower lip. Fascinated, intrigued, excitado, aroused. That's sick. See, his smile was sharp, dangerous. But honesty is refreshing. I'm surrounded by lies every day, Mona Lisa. Everyone wants something from me, plays angles, manipulates. But you just told me you want to destroy everything I've built. That's either supreme confidence or supreme stupidity. Which do you think it is? Confidence. He leaned in, his lips a breath away from mine. And I find I quite like it. The kiss was different this time. Not the controlled passion of our previous encounters, but something raw and desperate. When we finally broke apart, we were both breathing hard. Dimmy, he demanded, tell me. Tell me everything. What you really want, what you really think, who you really are beneath this perfect wife performance. So I did. We stayed in that study until dawn, trading secrets like currency. I told him about my grandmother, who'd smuggled information to the police for 20 years before being discovered and quietly eliminated. About my mother, who'd died giving birth to my younger brother. A brother who lived only 3 days, but whose brief existence had secured my father's acceptance in the family. About growing up knowing I was livestock, bred for a specific purpose, watching my aunts and cousins disappear into marriages that consumed them. And I told him my plan. Not all of it. I wasn't that foolish. But enough to test him, to see if the crack I'd sensed in his armor could become a fissure. I want to change this, I said. Not through revolution or violence. That would only create chaos that harms everyone. But through erosion. Small changes that add up over time. Protection for women, legal rights, ways out of marriages that are essentially slavery. A gradual shift in how we view half our population. And you think I can help with this? Ettore's voice was carefully neutral. I'm about to become capo. My job is to uphold tradition, not dismantle it. Your job is to ensure your family's survival, I corrected. And I'm telling you that the current system is unsustainable. You're bleeding young people to legitimate society because they see another way. You're hemorrhaging money because illegal enterprises draw more law enforcement attention. You're constantly at war because territorial disputes can't be resolved through legal channels. The old ways are dying, Ettore. You can either guide that death or be consumed by it. He was silent for a long moment. Then, Mio padre non sarà mai d'accordo. My father will never agree. Your father is old. He won't be capo much longer. I held his gaze steadily. But you will be. And when you are, you can choose to be the last of the old guard or the first of something new. Et tu? And you? What role do you see for yourself in this grand reformation? La tua consigliera, I said simply. Your advisor. your partner in rebuilding what's broken. Not your possession, but your equal. His laugh was sharp, incredulous. Equality doesn't exist in La Cosa Nostra. Then perhaps it's time it did. He stood abruptly, pacing to the window where dawn light was beginning to paint the sky in shades of rose and gold. I watched him struggle with everything I'd said, tradition warring with pragmatism, decades of conditioning fighting against the evidence of his own experience. Finally, he turned back to me. Una condizione, he said. One condition. If we do this, if I even consider this, you owe me complete honesty. No more performances, no more strategic silence. I need to know what you're thinking, what you're planning, what you want. Can you give me that? It was a trap, of course. Honesty would make me vulnerable, would expose my strategies before they bore fruit. But it was also an opportunity, a chance to build something real, if I was brave enough to take it. See, I said. But it goes both ways. You tell me everything too. Your business, your plans, your doubts. True partnership means true transparency. He crossed back to me, his hand extended. D'accordo. Agreed. I took his hand, felt his grip firm and warm around mine. We stood there in the dawn light, two people who'd been strangers 3 weeks ago, now bound by something far more complex than any marriage vow. Mia Regina, he murmured. My queen. Mio Re, I replied. My king. But I knew the truth. There could be only one ruler, and I intended to make sure it was me. The negotiation with the Corleonesi took 3 months. 3 months of careful meetings, calculated concessions, strategic compromises. I attended every session, sitting quietly beside Ettore, my presence a symbol of the new Montanari approach, transparent, diplomatic, willing to consider alternatives to violence. The old guard hated it, but they couldn't argue with results. Territory was ceded, yes, but in exchange, we gained something more valuable, a treaty. Signed agreements, binding arbitration clauses, mechanisms for resolving disputes without bloodshed. It was unprecedented in the history of Sicilian organized crime. It was also exactly what I needed. Incredible, Don Vittorio admitted one evening after the final agreement was signed. Incredible. He looked at me with something approaching respect. You may have saved this family, Figlia. Daughter. The word should have warmed me. Instead, it felt like another chain. But my position was secure now. The other families knew my name, knew I had Ettore's ear, knew that decisions made in the Montanari household went through me first. I'd become valuable, not as a womb, but as a strategist. Phase 1 complete. Phase 2 began the night Ettore's cousin Sofia came to me, her eye blackened, her lips split, her hands trembling as she gripped my arm. Aiutami, she begged. Help me. Per favore, Mona Lisa, non ho nessun altro. Please, I have no one else. I brought her to our private sitting room, sent for ice and grappa, and listened as she told me what I'd already suspected. Her husband, Roberto, beat her regularly. He'd married her for her connection to the Montanari family, used her to gain access to business opportunities, and treated her like property to be disciplined when she displeased him. Hai detto a qualcuno? I asked. Have you told anyone? Chi mi crederebbe? Who would believe me? Sofia's laugh was bitter. Roberto è rispettato. Ha amici potenti. Io sono solo una moglie. Roberto is respected. He has powerful friends. I'm just a wife. You're a Montanari, I corrected gently. And you're under this family's protection, including from other members. Hope flickered in her swollen eyes. You would help me? Si. I took her hands in mine. But you have to trust me completely. Can you do that? She nodded, tears streaming down her bruised face. Over the next weeks, I built a case, photographs of Sofia's injuries, medical records documenting patterns of abuse, testimonies from servants who'd witnessed Roberto's violence. I gathered it all carefully, methodically, knowing I'd only get one chance. Then I brought it to Ettore. He was in his study, reviewing import manifests, when I entered unannounced. His eyes flickered with pleasure at seeing me. We'd fallen into an easier intimacy over the past months, the kind built on mutual respect rather than simple desire. "Cara," he began, but I cut him off. "Roberto is beating Sofia." The pleasure vanished, replaced by cold assessment. "You have proof?" I laid the file on his desk. He read through it in silence, his jaw tightening with each page. When he finished, he looked up at me. "What do you want me to do?" "Proteggila," I said. "Protect her. Make it clear that violence against Montanari women is unacceptable. Set a precedent." "Roberto is a soldato," Ettore said slowly. "A good earner. If I move against him, I need justification the men will understand." "You have it." I tapped the file. "He's harming family. That violates the most fundamental code. Il Codice also says a man's wife is his to discipline." "Then change the code." The words hung between us, as radical as anything I'd proposed. Ettore leaned back in his chair, studying me. "You want me to rewrite centuries of tradition because one woman is being hurt?" "I want you to rewrite it because it's wrong," I said. "Because using tradition to justify abuse makes us no better than animals. Because every woman in this family is watching to see if you mean what you said about partnership and equality, or if it was just pretty words to placate me." He was silent for a long moment. Then he stood, picking up the file. "Bene," he said. "Convocare una riunione." "Good. Call a meeting." The meeting was held 3 days later in the Grand Hall of Villa Montanari. Every capodicina, every soldato of importance, every uomo d'onore who'd sworn loyalty to the family. And for the first time in the family's history, their wives were also summoned. The women entered uncertain, whispering among themselves, clearly uncomfortable in this male space. I greeted each one, guided them to seats I'd arranged along the side of the hall. Sofia sat beside me, her bruises faded, but still visible. When everyone had assembled, Ettore stood. "Grazie per essere venuti," he began. "Thank you for coming. We're here to address a matter that affects the honor and integrity of our family." He laid out the case against Roberto methodically, clinically. The evidence was undeniable. Photographs circulated through the crowd, medical records passed from hand to hand. I watched the women's faces, recognition, pain, and in some cases, barely suppressed hope. Roberto stood in the center of the hall, his face flushed with rage. "Sono affari miei," he spat. "This is my business. Sofia è mia moglie. Sofia is my wife." "No," Ettore said quietly. "Sofia is a Montanari. She was a Montanari before you married her, and she'll be a Montanari if that marriage ends. You married into this family, Roberto. You serve at our pleasure." "Questo è ridicolo." "This is ridiculous." Roberto looked to the other men for support. "Un uomo ha il diritto di disciplinare la propria moglie." A man has the right to discipline his wife. "Non in questa famiglia," I said, rising from my seat. "Not in this family." All eyes turned to me. I felt the weight of every gaze, some hostile, some curious, some desperate. "The old code," I continued, my voice carrying across the hall, "was written in a different time, when women had no legal rights, no way to support themselves, no protection except through their husbands and fathers. But times have changed. Women can work now, can own property, can divorce abusive spouses. The world has evolved, so must we." "Tu non puoi cambiare il codice," an older capodicina objected. "You cannot change the code." è sacro. It's sacred. Nothing is sacred except family, I replied. And family means protecting the vulnerable, not exploiting them. Roberto has violated that most fundamental principle. The question now is, what do we do about it? Ettore stepped forward, standing shoulder to shoulder with me. La mia decisione è questa, he announced. My decision is this. Sofia's marriage to Roberto is annulled. He'll pay her restitution, half his earnings for the next 5 years. He's demoted from soldado to associate, and if he lays hands on another woman in violence, he's out of the family entirely. Capito? Understood? The silence was deafening. This was beyond unprecedented. It was revolutionary. A man punished, a woman vindicated, all under the watchful eyes of La Cosa Nostra. Finally, Don Vittorio rose from his seat. Every eye turned to the patriarch, waiting for him to overturn his son's ruling, to restore the natural order. Instead, he nodded slowly. Saggio, he said. Wise. We've lost too many good women to stupidity and pride. If this new way keeps them alive and loyal, so be it. The decision was made. Roberto left the hall in disgrace. Sofia wept in my arms, whispering thanks I didn't deserve. I'd used her pain for my own purposes after all. The other women filed out slowly, several pausing to touch my hand, to whisper their own stories of suffering. I collected each one, filed them away. Ammunition for the future. That night, alone with Ettore, he asked the question I'd been expecting. Was that your end game? Protecting Sofia? No, I admitted. That was a beginning. Establishing precedent. Showing what's possible. There are 15 other women in this family suffering similar or worse abuse. I intend to help them all. And then what? He poured us both grappa, handed me a glass. After you've reformed our treatment of women, what's your next target? I took a sip, the liquor burning pleasantly. Everything else. He laughed, genuine amusement warming his eyes. Ambiziosa. Ambitious. You knew that when you married me. No, he corrected. I knew I was marrying a Lucchese daughter. I had no idea I was getting a revolutionary. Disappointed? He pulled me close, his lips finding mine. Affascinato, he murmured against my mouth. Fascinated. My father always said to beware women who think. Now I understand why. And yet you're helping me. Forse sono pazzo. Maybe I'm crazy, his hands tangled in my hair. Or perhaps I'm finally seeing clearly for the first time. We made love that night with a new understanding between us. Not equals yet, but moving toward something that resembled partnership. As he held me after, his fingers tracing idle patterns on my skin, he asked another question. The Luccheses, he said. Your family. They're part of the system you want to destroy. What happens to them when you succeed? It was the question I'd been avoiding, the one that made my mission personal rather than ideological. They sold me, I said quietly, reduced me to breeding stock and traded me for territory. Whatever happens to them is justice, not revenge. Sei sicura di questo? Are you sure about that? I thought about my father, who'd signed the contract that valued me at 5 to 7 offspring. My uncles, who'd toasted my marriage while planning how to spend their share of the profits. My aunts and cousins who'd taught me to be silent, to be small, to survive by disappearing. See, I said. I'm sure, but I wondered if that was true. If when the time came to burn it all down, I'd have the courage to watch my own blood burn with it. The changes came slowly, then all at once. Within 6 months of Sofia's vindication, 3 more women had come forward with abuse allegations. All 3 marriages were dissolved, the men punished, the women protected. Word spread through the families. The Montanaris were doing something radical, something dangerous, something that might just change everything. Other families watched with suspicion, some with open hostility. The Corleones sent a delegation, ostensibly to congratulate us on our successful treaty, but really to assess the situation. I sat in on the meeting, my presence now accepted if not entirely welcomed. Abbiamo sentito voci, their capodecina said. We've heard rumors. Delle mogli che lasciano I loro mariti, degli uomini puniti per disciplinare le proprie donne, about wives leaving their husbands, about men punished for disciplining their women. Voci accurate, Ettore confirmed. Accurate rumors. And you think this is wise? To undermine the natural order? I spoke before Ettore could. We think it's wise to adapt to changing times. The world is watching us more closely than ever. Law enforcement, politicians, journalists, they're all looking for ways to take us down. Internal stability strengthens us. Internal chaos makes us vulnerable. Chaos, the man repeated, his eyes hard. Is that what you call a wife leaving her husband? I call it preserving valuable assets, I replied calmly. Every woman in our families represents years of training, decades of accumulated knowledge, connections we've built carefully. When we drive them to desperation through abuse, we lose all that investment. Is that good business? The framing, business rather than morality, seemed to resonate. The Corleonesi left without committing to anything, but also without open opposition. Small victories. But not everyone was content with gradual change. It was Ettore's younger sister, Isabella, who pushed us towards something more radical. She came to me 6 months after Sophia's case, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. I want to go to university, she said without preamble. In Milan, to study law. I set down my espresso. What does your father say? Che è ridicolo. That it's ridiculous. That women don't need education. That my job is to marry well and produce heirs. Her voice was bitter. But I'm 23, Mona Lisa. I've been watching men half as intelligent as me make decisions that affect people's lives. I could do better. I want to do better. Law, I mused. Interesting choice. I want to understand the system we're navigating. Want to know how to use it, bend it, make it work for us instead of against us. She leaned forward. Tu capisci, vero? You understand, right? You're doing the same thing, just from inside instead of outside. Sharp girl, dangerous combination, intelligence and observation. What do you need from me? I asked. Convincere Ettore. Convince Ettore. If he approves, Papa will have to accept it. It took 3 weeks of careful maneuvering. I framed it as strategic advantage, having a lawyer in the family who understood both the legal system and La Cosa Nostra from inside, someone who could navigate the increasingly complex regulatory environment, someone who could protect family interests through legitimate channels. Ettore saw through it immediately. You want to send Isabella to university so she can learn to dismantle the system from within, he said one night, his tone more amused than angry. I want Isabella to have choices, I corrected. What she does with those choices is up to her. Bugiarda. Liar. But he was smiling. You're creating an army, Cara. One educated, empowered woman at a time. And you're letting me see. He pulled me into his lap, his arms circling my waist. Because I've realized something about power, mia moli. True power isn't about control. It's about building systems strong enough to survive without you. And the only way to do that is to create people capable of independent thought. Pericoloso pensiero, I murmured. Dangerous thought. Your father would call that weakness. My father, Ettore said, his voice hardening, is dying. The words hung in the air between us. Don Vittorio's health had been declining for months, the result of decades of rich food, strong drink, and constant stress. The doctors gave him perhaps a year, maybe less. When he dies, Ettore continued, I become capo, And when I'm capo, we can move faster, change more. Brucia tutto, like you said. You remember that? Ricordo tutto. I remember everything. His hand came up to cup my face. Every word you've said, every move you've made, every small revolution you've started. I see what you're building, Mona Lisa, and I want to help you build it. Why? The question escaped before I could stop it. Why help me destroy the very system that gives you power? He was silent for a long moment, his dark eyes searching mine. Because I'm tired, he said finally. Tired of the violence, the constant vigilance, the knowledge that any show of weakness could be fatal. Tired of watching good people corrupted by a system that rewards the worst in human nature. Tired of being afraid that any son we have will be molded into what I became, a man who values power over humanity. We don't have a son, I pointed out. Non ancora. Not yet. His hand moved to my stomach, rested there gently. But eventually, and when we do, I want him, or her, to have options, to choose differently if they want, to build something better. The tenderness in his voice, the vulnerability in his admission, threatened to undo me. I'd been so focused on my mission, on revenge and revolution, that I'd forgotten to guard against the most dangerous possibility, actually caring for the man I'd intended to use. Ettore? I began, but he kissed me, stopping the words. What followed was different from our previous encounters, slower, deeper, weighted with unspoken emotion. When he finally entered me, I found myself clinging to him, no longer certain where the performance ended and reality began. After lying tangled in sweat-dampened sheets, he spoke again. Tell me about your grandmother. The request surprised me. Why? Because she's the one who taught you all this, Vero? Right? The information gathering, the strategic thinking, the long game. I want to understand where you learned to be who you are. So I told him. About Nonna Elena, who'd been married at 16 to a mafioso she'd never met. About how she'd endured 40 years of marriage, producing 8 children, burying 3. About how she'd secretly documented every crime, every deal, every murder she'd witnessed. And about how, when she'd finally gathered enough evidence to bring down the entire Cosca, she'd been discovered and eliminated, made to look like a heart attack, buried with full honors, her life's work destroyed. She failed, I finished quietly. 40 years of careful planning, and it all came to nothing. She didn't fail, Ettore said. She taught you, gave you the tools, the knowledge, the resolve. Her work continues through you. Romantic pensiero, romantic thought. Veritiero pensiero, truthful thought. He propped himself up on one elbow, looking down at me. You're finishing what she started, Mona Lisa. Except you're doing it smarter. Not from outside trying to destroy us, but from inside reshaping us into something sustainable. And if I can't? I asked. If the system is too entrenched, too powerful, too willing to destroy anyone who threatens it? Then we burn it down, he said simply. Together. The promise hung between us, dangerous, radical, possibly suicidal, but also strangely comforting. I wasn't alone anymore. The next morning, Isabella left for Milan with Ettore's blessing and Don Vittorio's grudging acceptance. The old man was too weak to fight, too tired to care about one rebellious daughter when his empire was crumbling around him. And it was crumbling. Subtly, gradually, but undeniably. The treaty with the Corleonesi had emboldened other families to seek diplomatic solutions to conflicts. The new protections for women had started spreading, slowly, met with resistance, but spreading nonetheless. Young people were leaving for legitimate careers, seeing options their parents never had. The old ways were dying. But death throes could be violent. It was Don Vittorio who delivered the warning. calling us to his bedside one evening. He looked ancient, his once robust frame wasted by disease, but his eyes were still sharp. "Ascoltami bene," he rasped. "Listen carefully. Pensate di essere furbi, di cambiare tutto senza conseguenze. Ma ci sono uomini che non accetteranno mai questi cambiamenti. Uomini pericolosi. You think you're being clever, changing everything without consequences. But there are men who will never accept these changes. Dangerous men." "Chi?" I asked. "Who?" He listed names, old guard capos from various families, men who'd built their power on traditional structures, who saw our reforms as threats to everything they'd created. "Ti uccideranno," he told me bluntly. "They'll kill you. Entrambi, se necessario, e riporteranno le vecchie tradizioni. Both of you if necessary, and bring back the old ways. Then we'll have to make sure they can't," Ettore said calmly. Vittorio's laugh turned into a coughing fit. When he recovered, he fixed his son with a hard stare. "Sei innamorato di lei. You're in love with her." "Sì. L'amore rende stupidi. Love makes you stupid." "Forse," Ettore acknowledged. "Perhaps. Ma anche potenti. But also powerful." The old man studied us both for a long moment. Then he sighed. "Andate," he said. "Go. Fate quello che dovete fare, ma siate pronti alle conseguenze. Do what you must, but be ready for the consequences." He died 3 weeks later. The funeral was massive. Every family in Sicily represented, every uomo d'onore paying respects to a man who'd ruled for 30 years. I stood beside Ettore in black Valentino, my face appropriately somber, my hand in his. And I watched. Watched who attended, who didn't, who offered genuine condolences, who mouthed platitudes, who looked at Ettore with respect, who with calculation. I was building a map of allies and enemies, preparing for the war I knew was coming. Because Don Vittorio had been right about one thing: change always met resistance. And in our world, resistance meant blood. The question was whose blood would be spilled, and whether we'd survive to see the world we were trying to build. Ettore's ascension to capo was swift and brutal. 3 families tried to challenge his authority in the first month. All 3 were crushed, not through violence, but through economic warfare. Contracts canceled, alliances dissolved, territories slowly squeezed until they had no choice but to bend the knee or face annihilation. It was elegant, ruthless, exactly what I'd taught him. But it also made enemies. The attack came on a Tuesday evening, 6 months after Vittorio's death. I was in the villa's library, reviewing financial documents for one of our legitimate businesses, when the windows shattered inward. Glass exploded across the room. I dove behind the heavy mahogany desk as gunfire erupted. Automatic weapons, multiple shooters, clearly professional. This wasn't a warning. This was an assassination attempt. My first thought was Ettore. He'd been in a meeting in the city, surrounded by his men. Safe, probably. But I needed to know. I crawled toward the desk drawer where I kept a pistol, another of Nonna's legacies, when the library door burst open. "Signora Montanari," a man's voice called. Not one I recognized. "Vieni con noi e nessuno si farà male. Come with us and no one gets hurt. Liar." They'd already hurt people. I could hear screaming from other parts of the villa, the sharp reports of return fire from our security. I steadied my breathing, checked the pistol. 9 rounds. Against how many attackers? "I said come out," the voice repeated, closer now. Footsteps crunching over broken glass. I rose smoothly, pistol leveled. The man stood 3 feet away, his own weapon pointed at the floor, clearly not expecting armed resistance from a capo's wife. Fatal mistake. I shot him in the shoulder, center mass being too risky given my limited marksman skills. He went down with a cry of pain. I stepped over him, taking his assault rifle and moved toward the door. The hallway was chaos. Bodies, our security, their attackers, strewn across the floor. Smoke hung in the air from grenades or small fires. The villa I'd called home for over a year was being torn apart. I heard voices from the east wing, our bedroom. More attackers, searching for me or for evidence I couldn't tell. 3 of them, maybe 4, based on the footsteps. I had perhaps 2 minutes before they realized their associate in the library hadn't succeeded. I could run. The villa had escape routes, panic rooms, ways out that Ettore had shown me when I'd first arrived. I could disappear, let them think I'd been killed in the attack, start over somewhere new. Or I could fight. My grandmother had run, gathered evidence, tried to work from outside the system. And she'd died for it, her life's work destroyed. I wouldn't make the same mistake. I moved down the hallway toward our bedroom, the assault rifle comfortable in my hands. Nonna had ensured I knew how to shoot just in case. At the doorway, I paused, listening. Niente qui, someone said. Nothing here. La donna deve essere da qualche altra parte. The woman must be somewhere else. Troviamola, another voice commanded. Find her. Il capo vuole che sia viva. Ha piani per lei. The boss wants her alive. He has plans for her. Plans. I could imagine what kind. They emerged from the bedroom in a cluster, focused on their search, not watching their backs. Another fatal mistake. I opened fire. 2 went down immediately. The 3rd returned fire, bullets chewing through the walls beside me. I ducked, rolled, came up shooting. He collapsed. Silence fell, broken only by the distant sounds of fighting from other parts of the villa. I was checking the bodies, looking for identification, anything that might tell me who'd sent them, when I heard it. Mona Lisa. Ettore's voice, raw with panic. He was alive, and he'd come back for me. Qui, I called. Here. He appeared at the end of the hallway, blood on his shirt, his pistol drawn. When he saw me standing among the bodies, his eyes widened. Dio mio, he breathed. My God. Sei ferita? Are you hurt? No. I lowered the rifle. But we need to go. There are more of them. He crossed to me in 3 strides, his hands framing my face, checking for injuries despite my assurance. Pensavo, I thought. I know. I cut off the words we didn't have time for. Later. Right now we need to secure the perimeter and figure out who sent them. His expression shifted, from fear to something else. Admiration, perhaps. Or the final breaking of whatever illusions he'd still held about the woman he'd married. Ben, he said. Good. Marco, his consigliere, appeared, also bloodied but alive. Capo? Secure all entry points. Get the wounded to the medical ward. And bring me every attacker still breathing. I want answers. It took 2 hours to restore order. 7 of our security were dead, another 12 wounded. But we'd killed or captured all 15 attackers, a testament to the defensive preparations Ettore had insisted on after becoming capo. The interrogations were brutal. I watched from behind one-way glass as Ettore extracted information using methods I preferred not to examine too closely. By dawn, we had what we needed. The Alleanza Tradizionale, the Traditional Alliance, a coalition of old guard capos from 5 families who'd united against what they saw as Ettore's dangerous reforms. They'd planned to kill him, install a puppet capo in his place, and return the Montanaris to proper traditions. My survival had been incidental. They'd planned to capture me, use me to force Ettore's cooperation before eliminating him. Then I would have been. What? Remarried to the new capo? Killed as a symbol of the failed reform? The interrogated men weren't clear on that detail. Bastardi! Ettore snarled, his knuckles white on the interrogation room's table. Pensavano di potermi distruggere e riprendere tutto. They thought they could destroy me and take everything back. They almost succeeded, I pointed out. If we'd been less prepared, less lucky. We weren't lucky. We were ready. He turned to me, his eyes hard. Because you insisted on defensive preparations, security protocols, escape routes. You knew this was coming. I knew change would be resisted, I corrected. I didn't know how or when. Ma sapevi. But you knew. He crossed to me, his hands finding my waist. Sei stata tu a prepararci. A insegnarmi che essere capo significa più che comandare. Significa proteggere, pensare in anticipo, costruire qualcosa che sopravviva alla prossima crisi. You prepared us. Taught me that being capo means more than commanding. It means protecting, thinking ahead, building something that survives the next crisis. And now? I asked. How do we respond? His smile was sharp, dangerous. Gli insegniamo cosa succede a chi minaccia la famiglia. We teach them what happens to those who threaten family. What followed was a masterclass in strategic ruthlessness. Ettore didn't respond with violence. That would have played into their narrative of him as weak, led astray by a woman. Instead, he went after their economic foundations. Business licenses revoked through corrupt officials we controlled. Construction permits mysteriously delayed. Shipments seized by customs. Investments audited by tax authorities. Nothing illegal on our part, nothing that could be traced back directly, but devastating nonetheless. Within 3 months, 2 of the 5 families were bankrupt. A third sued for peace, offering concessions to restore their business relationships. The remaining 2 dug in, but they were isolated now, cut off from allies who'd learned the cost of opposition. And through it all, I worked in the shadows. I'd started building my network years ago. Women in every family, positioned in places of quiet power. Secretaries who saw every document. Accountants who understood cash flows. Lawyers who knew which loopholes to exploit. Teachers who educated the next generation. Nurses who heard deathbed confessions. They'd all been invisible, dismissed as mere women doing women's work. None of the men noticed them. That was their mistake. Information flowed to me in steady streams. Who was planning what? Which alliances were fracturing? Where money was hidden? Which secrets were most valuable? I became indispensable. Not just to Ettore, but to the entire structure. It was Isabella who finally articulated what I'd been building. She'd returned from Milan for Christmas, now in her 2nd year of law school. Her sharp mind honed even further by formal education. Over espresso in the villa's sunroom, she studied me with calculating eyes. Sei un genio, she said bluntly. You're a genius. Hai costruito un'ombra cosa nostra, tutta femminile, tutto invisibile agli uomini che pensano di comandare. You've built a shadow cosa nostra, all female, all invisible to the men who think they're in charge. I didn't deny it. What gave it away? The Greco collapsed last month. Everyone assumed it was Ettore's doing, his economic warfare against the Alleanza. But I saw the pattern. Contracts canceled by women in procurement. Permits denied by female bureaucrats. Information leaked by secretaries and assistants. It was coordinated. Surgical. Tuo lavoro. Your work. E se lo fossi? And if it was? She leaned forward. Voglio entrare. I want in. Whatever you're building, I want to be part of it. It's dangerous, I warned. If the men discover what we're doing, lo so. I know. But I've spent 2 years watching the legal system, seeing how laws are bent and broken to serve male interests. I can help. Use the law the way you're using everything else, as a weapon for change. I studied my sister-in-law, seeing in her the same fire that had driven me, the same determination to be more than what they'd intended. Bene, I said. Good. Ma ci sono regole. But there are rules. Over the next hour, I explained the network I'd built, the communication methods, the safety protocols, the long-term objectives. Isabella absorbed it all with frightening speed. So the end game, she said finally, is complete reformation from within. Not destroying La Cosa Nostra, but transforming it into something sustainable and legal. Esattamente. Exactly. We can't simply tear it down. That creates chaos that harms everyone. But we can slowly replace the old structures with new ones. Legal businesses instead of illegal. Negotiation instead of violence. Partnership instead of domination. How long? A generation, maybe 2. Real change takes time. E Ettore? And Ettore? Does he know? That was the question I'd been wrestling with for months. Ettore knew about the women I'd helped, the precedents we'd set, the gradual shifts in policy. But did he understand the full scope? The shadow organization I'd built? The eventual elimination of everything La Cosa Nostra had been? He knows enough, I said finally. He trusts me. That's what matters. But I wondered if trust would be enough when he finally understood the full extent of what I'd done. That night, lying beside my husband in the darkness, I felt the weight of all my secrets pressing down. Ettore's breathing was deep and even, one arm draped across my waist, his body warm against mine. Sei sveglia, he murmured. You're awake. Si. Pensando a cosa? Thinking about what? I could have lied. Could have said something innocuous about the holidays or villa renovations. But Don Vittorio's warning echoed in my mind. L'amor rende stupidi. Love made you stupid. But perhaps also brave. Ti amo, I said quietly. I love you. He went very still. We'd never said the words before, had danced around them, implied them through actions, but never spoken them aloud. Anche io ti amo, he replied, his voice rough with emotion. I love you too. His hand tightened on my waist. Da quanto tempo lo sai? How long have you known? Since you let Isabella go to university. Since you changed the code to protect Sophia. Since you chose partnership over tradition. I turned to face him in the darkness. Since you proved you were capable of being more than what your father made you. E tu? And you? Da quanto tempo mi ami? How long have you loved me? I don't know, I admitted. It happened so gradually I didn't notice until it was already done. Somewhere between hating what you represented and admiring who you were becoming, I fell. He kissed me then, tender, searching, waited with everything we'd never said. When we finally broke apart, his forehead rested against mine. Ti spaventa? Does it frighten you? Terrifica. It terrifies me. Because now I have something to lose. Allora siamo uguali. Then we're the same. His hand cupped my face. Ho sempre avuto paura di perderti, Mona Lisa. Dal primo momento in cui ti ho visto, ho saputo che eri pericolosa. Non solo per me, ma per tutto ciò che mio padre aveva costruito. E ho scelto te, comunque. I've always been afraid of losing you. From the first moment I saw you, I knew you were dangerous. Not just to me, but to everything my father built. And I chose you anyway. Why? Perché meritavi di essere scelta. Because you deserve to be chosen. Perché ho visto in te la possibilità di essere meglio. E perché, alla fine, ho capito che distruggere le vecchie tradizioni per costruire qualcosa di nuovo non è tradimento, è evoluzione. Because I saw in you the possibility of being better, and because, in the end, I understood that destroying old ways to build something new isn't betrayal. It's evolution. Even if that means the end of La Cosa Nostra as your father knew it. Specialmente allora. Especially then. I pulled back slightly, searching his face in the dim light. You know what I've been doing. The network, the shadow organization, the long-term plan. Si. Yes. Did you think I wouldn't notice women in positions of power, information flowing too smoothly, changes happening too fast to be accidental? I'm not blind, Kara. And you let me. Tiho ayutada, he corrected. I helped you. Every reform, every precedent, every shift in policy. I knew what you were building, and I wanted to help build it. Why didn't you say anything? His smile was soft in the darkness. Perché avevi bisogno di farlo a modo tuo. Di sapere che era opera tua, non mia. Di avere il controllo che nessuno ti aveva mai permesso di avere. Because you needed to do it your way. To know it was your work, not mine. To have the control no one ever let you have. Tears pricked my eyes, the first time I'd cried since my wedding day. I thought I was using you. Lo eri. You were. E io ti stavo usando. Ci siamo usati a vicenda e da quell'uso è nato qualcosa di reale, qualcosa che vale la pena proteggere. And I was using you. We used each other. And from that, use grew something real. Something worth protecting. Partnership, I whispered. Amore, he corrected. Love. Siamo la stessa cosa per noi. It's the same thing for us. He was right. For people like us, love and partnership, trust and strategy, devotion and pragmatism, they were all tangled together, inseparable. We made love that night, with new honesty between us, the last barriers finally broken. And afterwards, as dawn light crept through the windows, we began planning in earnest. Not just the next reform or the next crisis, but the complete transformation. A timeline spanning decades, touching every aspect of La Cosa Nostra. Legal businesses replacing illegal ones. Legitimate power replacing coercion. True partnership between men and women. It would take time. Would face resistance. Would cost us both more than we could imagine. But for the first time since I'd arrived at Villa Montanari as an unwilling bride, I felt genuine hope. 3 years later, I stood in the villa's garden, watching my daughter chase butterflies through the orange grove. Vittoria, named for her grandfather, but with the strength to surpass him. 3 years old, dark-haired and fierce-eyed, already showing signs of the intelligence that would serve her well. Ettore approached from the house, Isabella at his side. His sister had graduated law school and was now working to reform Italy's legal approach to organized crime, from the inside, using every connection we'd built. Le nuove leggi sono passate, she announced. The new laws passed. Protezione per I testimoni, alternative alla detenzione per I reati minori, supporto per le famiglie che vogliono uscire dalla vita criminale. Witness protection, alternatives to incarceration for minor crimes, support for families wanting to leave criminal life. Small steps, but steps nonetheless. E I Greco? I asked. And the Grecos? Hanno accettato I termini. Transizione verso attività legittime entro 5 anni. They've accepted the terms. Transition to legitimate activities within 5 years. Another family choosing evolution over extinction. Ettore's hand found mine, his fingers threading through mine with familiar warmth. Funziona, he said quietly. It's working. Lentamente, ma funziona. Slowly, but it's working. Ci vorrà una vita, I reminded him. It will take a lifetime. Allora è bene che prevediamo di trascorrere quella vita insieme. Then it's good we plan to spend that lifetime together. Vittoria ran to us, her small hands clutching an orange blossom. Mamma, guarda. Mommy, look. I knelt, accepting the flower. Bellissimo, tesoro. Beautiful, darling. Come te, Ettore murmured, like you. I looked up at this man I'd married as a stranger, planned to use as a tool, and ended up loving despite every intention otherwise. At the sister-in-law who'd become my closest ally. At the daughter who represented everything we were fighting for. A future with choices, with options, with freedom. The old ways were dying, not through violence or dramatic revolution, but through steady erosion. Each woman educated, each precedent set, each business legitimized was another brick removed from the foundation of La Cosa Nostra. It would take generations to complete, would face resistance from those who profited from the old system, would require sacrifices neither Ettore nor I could fully anticipate. But we'd made our choice, not to burn it all down in spectacular destruction. That would only create chaos, but to transform it from within, replacing violence with negotiation, coercion with partnership, domination with equality. Fire of a different kind, the slow burn of phoenix ash, preparing for rebirth. I was no longer a silent sacrifice, no longer invisible property. I was La Donna, the woman who changed everything, wife to the capo who dared to listen, mother to the next generation who would have choices we never did. And together, piece by piece, we were building something new from the ashes of La Cosa Nostra, something that might actually deserve the name, familia, family,